literacy. Tony's newest book, Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five, is a stunning, true crime book that humanizes the people at the heart of this story and showcases the impact the event had on the families left behind. Before we get started with the discussion, I would like to do some introductions. First, please welcome moderator Dr. April Paluca. Dr. Paluca is an alumna of Sam Houston State and Texas A&M University. She is a historian of contemporary Latin American history and wrote her dissertation about the Nazca Line site in Peru. She has been a history professor for several years and joined the faculty at Houston Community College in August 2023, where she teaches Mexican American and U.S. history courses. She teaches her freshman U.S. history surveys with a true crime theme. Please welcome our moderator, Ms. April Paluca. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our special guest for this event, Tony Wright. Tony is the author of 2 comic books and a graphic novel with Source Point Press. He is an archivist, father, husband, and a lost soul of rock and roll. When he is not writing, he is spending time with his family. Tony has been featured as the Yuba County 5 case expert on the Mopac audio podcast Yuba County 5, and was also featured as a case expert on the Motor Trend TV show autobiography Cold Case. Please give a warm welcome to our author, Tony Wright. So, going on, the discussion between the moderator and author will last for 45 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A session to follow thereafter from both our in-house and virtual audience. Now, we will begin the conversation.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Tony Wright, for coming here to talk to us about your work. Now, this case centers on what should have been just a nice evening with 5 friends named Ted, Jack, Phil, Jackie, and Gary. On the night of February 24th, 1978, a group of friends go out to a basketball game using the familiar route, but they do not make it back home. Now, you write in chapter 8 that everything about this evening was incredibly out of character for the men. So can you start us off with a few things that just didn't add up about that night?
Sure. So on the evening of February 24th, 1978, 5 friends, Jack Madruga, who's the driver of a 1969 Mercury Montego, Ted Lear, Jackie Hewitt, Gary Mathias, and Bill Sterling. They're from the Yuba County area, which is north of Sacramento. They just hop into a car and they go to a basketball game up in Chico. So it's basically taking a 50-minute drive north on the highway. They watch a basketball game, and when the game's over, they go grab some snacks, they get back in the car, and all they have to do is drive south from Chico, and the highway does split at a certain point where they can take California State Highway 70 or 99, which leads them home. There's no wrong choice. But instead of coming home, their car is found abandoned about 70 miles in the wrong direction. And this is Northern California, so the car is found abandoned up in the Plymouth National Forest, which is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada Mountains. So you've got a very rocky, treacherous terrain. There's snow up there because it's the winter, and temperatures are freezing cold. And it's completely unlike where they were down in Chico or even down in Yuba County. It's much more wild, much more flat, and not a place that they would be up in Plymouth. So this diversion from coming home to go up into the Plymouth National Forest is baffling because there's no reason to go up that way. And their car is found abandoned in the middle of nowhere, which makes it even more troubling because all 5 men had left the car and went into the Plymouth National Forest, and they're all wearing sort of light spring clothes, like pants, like shirt, maybe a jean jacket or a nylon type jacket. and it's 29 degrees outside. And I'm a Midwesterner, so I'm used to the snow, I'm used to the cold. And to go into that without hat, gloves, anything like that, even boots, is a bad idea, because when you're in the mountains that time of year, snow can drift up 3 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, even higher, depending on where you are. And what was important to these guys is the next day they had a basketball tournament in the Sacramento area, and they were part of a sort of an adult program for people with disabilities or mental illness, and they were part of a basketball team, and going to the college game in Chico was a way to sort of psych themselves up and say, all right, tomorrow we're going to win, we're totally going to crush it, we're going to be, the champions, and then after this we're going to go down to LA because Special Olympics in California are going to be held at UCLA, to hang out in the city, maybe go to Disneyland. So an important event is derailed by a strange journey into the Lewis National Forest. And as I mentioned, they were part of the program with adults with disabilities, and for these men, routine was very important. So to say, hey, we're going to this basketball game and we're going to head home, this is the perfect night for them. But we're going to head to this basketball game, drive 70 miles into the mountains, and run into the woods. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so for many years, we've been trying to figure out this case, and the 5 men collectively are known as Yuba County 5. So for so many years, we've tried to discuss this case with family and with some of the experts, and we've tried to put together some kind of theory, like, why did this happen? It's way out of character. And people will automatically say, well, if people have a disability or if they have a mental illness, it's their own doing, it's their own fault. But, the book, the thing I wanted to show is these men were leading productive lives, they were responsible people, they knew their situation, they knew their surroundings, and this disappearance just isn't working for a lot of us as far as just some, oops, I took the wrong turn. I've been on that road, and we don't do that.
As Jack's mother pointed out, things aren't right.
Yes. And when I saw that in the newspaper, because I was trying to figure out the title of the book, and when I saw it, I said, coming from the Midwest, we have sayings like that. When you hear something like things aren't right, that really encapsulated this whole investigation, the disappearance, and everything that's happened afterwards, that nothing makes any sense. We're still trying to figure out, the reasoning behind the movements of just exiting a highway and going through a town called Oroville and then winding your way up into the Blues. There's no reason for that.
So before we delve into more details and more
Yes.
specifics, in your introduction you write that a retired professor told you once that the books people end up writing find them, and not the other way around. So for those who haven't yet had a chance to read the book, can you tell us how this book found you?
Sure. So I work in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I work for the City Archives. So we're always helping researchers with projects. And that guy that you had mentioned, his name was Carl Bajema. He was a biologist. He was doing research on trees in Michigan, and kind of like, why were they coming down on those trees, and what were the trees used for? And he discovered that the trees were part of the trolley industry. Michigan had some cities with interurbans and trolley systems, and he thought, wow, we used to have that in Grand Rapids. And it's a mid-sized city of about 200,000, so he found that to be so fascinating that this great city transit system was just ripped out in the 30s, and it would have been so helpful today. And he wanted to know so much about it, and that's what he told me. He didn't want to write a book about trolleys. He wanted to write a book about forestry in Michigan. And at the time, I was listening to a lot of true crime podcasts and watching true crime channels on YouTube. And my favorite was Criminally Enlisted. It's based out of Canada, and every week there's 3 cases with a common theme. So you could have 3 unsolved cases in Houston. But their 100th episode was titled Viewer's Choice. I thought, oh, this is going to be cool. What are the 3 cases? And the last story that aired was called Gary Mathias and the Boys, and it's the Yuba County 5 case. And I grew up in the 80s and watched Unsolved Mysteries and all those shows. And I said, oh, I've heard of this case. And then I stopped and said, well, maybe I haven't. And with my wife, we watch a lot of those types of shows, like true crime television. And again, hadn't heard of this case. And this is probably 2019. And so I go on Amazon, I go to my library, there's nothing about the case, there's very little information online outside of a 1978 article from the Washington Post. The Sacramento Bee ends up doing like a 2-day story. I'm thinking, okay, this is the tip of the iceberg, let's go further. And finally I just said, well, I'll just write the book, because I've helped people do research on books, and if I can do it, let's do it, let's tell the right story. So I end 2019 by talking to some of the families, Ted Weir's brother Dallas, and his sister-in-law Nelda. I speak to the lady who wrote the Washington Post article, and then I said, the holidays are coming up, I'm going to take a pause. But when 2020 comes around, I'm going to have all the time in the world to travel. I'm going to go to California, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that.
And that worked out great, right?
Yeah. It was like, oh boy. But the good part about it was, with social media and with email and just simple telephone calls, I start meeting all the family members, law enforcement that covered the case, some other people, including Drew Reason, who's here, who's a local researcher on the Yuba County 5. We start talking. Within a year, I'm in California doing research on the case. Within 2 years of that, I'm with Files of the Unexplained through Netflix, doing interviews and research, and I finally get to meet Dallas Weir Jr., who's Ted's nephew, and we have the ability to finally connect in person. So that was just fantastic. Like this idea of I can't find a book in the library. It's just sort of creating this chain reaction of here's the book. And the nice thing that Drew always said about the book was that it was called the Bible of the Yuba County 5 case, because I wanted to make sure that we have a comprehensive story, especially about the men, and telling who they were and getting as much information about that. And as the case itself, because there's many times where I've read a book as a true crime fan, and I'm like, wow, that was kind of lacking. There really isn't that much detail in a book. Because a pet peeve sometimes is you read a book about a case and they jump right into the case and you're like, well, people were impacted by this case. Let's talk about the people who were impacted. And so making sure to cover the families and even law enforcement too, who had to take on this great case and baffle them. They all have a story, so this book finds you, and you don't realize how much work you have to do to write a book, because you just think, oh, newspaper articles, a FOIA request, and this.
Quick Google search.
Yeah, you think it's easy, but you put a lot of time into it, and you go really into a rabbit hole.
Okay, so a little bit more of a specific question.
Sure.
So you mentioned that there was a series of murders committed by a man named Juan Corona that happened in the same decade, only a few years prior to these disappearances. And we know that Corona was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and simultaneously there was such a lack of knowledge about the illness and how it really impacts people. We also know that Gary Mathias was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And you argue in the book that Gary was scapegoated, that people just by default suspected Gary of being behind it due to his mental health diagnosis. And possibly also because the Corona murders were just so, close in their recent history.
Right.
So can you dive just a little bit deeper for us? Why was Gary's own community so quick to suspect him of having something to do with the deaths of his friends?
Well, anytime you hear the word schizophrenia, people are automatically going to assume the person's crazy, they're violent, and they're going to cause a lot of trouble, and they're a problem to society. The Juan Corona case was basically, he was a boss in the agricultural industry, which is huge in that part of California. And so he was responsible for overseeing a lot of migrant farmers in that area. And he had lured some of the men in and killed them and buried them on these large orchards that they had. And when the community heard about it, he was considered the worst serial killer in America. And it was just sort of this black eye on, Yuba City, which is neighbor to Yuba County, so everyone's like, great, we got a serial killer here. And then they find out he had schizophrenia, and they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And so, even today when I talk to people about the case, they hear about 4 men with disabilities, and one guy with schizophrenia, and they say, oh, well, the crazy guy led the dumb guys into the woods to die. And if you look at the case, and you actually can even go on YouTube or any form of social media, you can find people who are living with schizophrenia and they'll tell you, like, hey, I'm taking medication and these are the warning signs, I'm experiencing psychosis or I'm having trouble. And all these people are living productive lives. And Gary, he had a rough time, after being diagnosed and not being properly treated. But once he got on the right track and saw a doctor and was taking medication, working with his stepfather, he was out of trouble. He was doing well. And
his family said that he was really on track for about 3 years before
correct.
This tragedy happens.
Yeah.
He was on track. He really turned everything around because he was being treated for his illness.
Right, and if you look at all the his arrest, it's basically 71 to mid 75. By mid 75 to 78, Gary's doing really well. The only thing that happened with Gary is there were a couple of incidents where he may have had a fight with a person at a party, and the person he got in a fight with is kind of a tough guy in the community, so there could have been some bad blood between them. But Gary's life is completely on track. And like I said, even when you hear the story today, if you look at the comments section on YouTube, they're all like, well, the guy had schizophrenia, case closed. Or people will say, like, well, the man had disabilities, who let them get a driver's license, and who let him in a car, and who let him out of the house, and, this and that. So it's easy to use schizophrenia and a disability as sort of a scapegoat. And Gary's actions, that night don't show anything or set off any, alarms about his behavior. He seemed to be doing just fine, and nobody remembers Gary at all from that night. If they talk about the basketball game, the guy saw Ted Weir in the stands. If they went to the market afterwards, they remember Jackie Hewitt, because he was hanging around the cash register with the lady who's trying to close the store. She's like, here's this guy just hanging out with me at the register, but nobody remembers Gary. So,
if there had been an incident, that would be something people would remember.
Yeah, someone would come forward from the game and said, hey, there's this guy at the game, we don't know what his deal was, things were a little bit off. Nobody comes forward and says anything about Gary. And all these people at a basketball game, yeah, it's a Division II basketball game, but still, nobody remembers this guy. That shows us that there wasn't any issue going on with Gary. But it's been hard to get him out of the doghouse on that. It's our job to show, we don't see this guy as a problem. We see there was something else going on, and we're trying to figure that out.
So that actually relates to one of my other questions, where in chapter 6 you explained that you had a little bit of your own bias, but that research changed my opinion regarding Matthias. That's the direct quote.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that statement because that's exactly what research is supposed to do for us as anyone who researches anything. So as you present your research in this book, can you tell us about some aspects of this case that you hope will change minds?
Yeah, well, the first one, like I said, when I worked in the county government archive, we had a guy who would come in, great researcher. He was sort of like the local historian in certain areas, but he never took his medication at times. And you knew when he was walking in the building, you knew it was going to be a good day or a bad day. And so his experience was sort of a negative experience because he would have like this just loud outbursts. And it was like, okay, do we call security? How do we handle this? But in doing my own research and talking to people, I taught history, and one of my students had schizophrenia told me about it. He said, hey, this is a situation. And there was never an issue with him, and he was one of the best students we had. So just meeting people and hearing about their lives, that changes their opinion. But with the book, I wanted to make sure that people hear about 4 men with disabilities, 1 person with schizophrenia. This isn't on them just because of that. There's something else at play here. And due to the time period, we do not have like a GPS or CCTV or things like that that can really give us a good timeline of how things unfolded. What we're trying to show is something went down that night. Something bad happened, out of the ordinary. And this just wasn't kids on a joyride. This wasn't, something like, oh, let's go to the mountains and have fun. This was a deliberate drive up into the Plymouth, because if you make that drive, there's a lot of times where you just go, okay, I can turn around now. Why am I still driving? Because when I drove up there twice during the day and the night, that's all that's going through my mind. Like, okay, you can turn around, guys. I kept saying it in my head. I'm like, all right, turn around here. But they kept going. And parts of the Plymouth didn't have paved roads. And the driver, Jack Madruga, hated unpaved roads. He hated roads with potholes. I live in the Midwest, you get a lot of snow, it gets real hot, it gets real cold, potholes everywhere. I don't know if they're bad here in Houston or they're bad. They're bad all over the United States. So like when you're driving in the Midwest, it's like, oh no, not this road, because the snowplow comes through and just tore it all up. But if Jack Madruga saw that, he would stop his car and go, you guys can walk home. You're close enough.
He loved that car.
Yeah, any damage to the undercarriage, that would be like, no, not my car. And even inside, he kept it meticulous. I mean, he made sure that nobody brought booze in the car. He was pretty flexible with the guys bringing snacks in the car.
No backseat drivers.
Don't tell them where to go. So that was a big thing that even his nieces and nephews said. We went to concerts. He would take us to, kegers, after football games. Like we go, high school football game, they go drink and, they, have fun. And Jack Madruga's nickname was Doc. He was the designated driver because he wasn't a drinker, and he knew their limits and said, all right, you've had enough to drink, get in the car and take me home. And so you have a responsible guy driving to the middle of nowhere into the snow. I keep sounding like a broken record saying, as a Midwesterner, when their car was abandoned in 5-6 inches of snow, they got stuck. I know, like, okay, if I'm stuck in this much snow, I can back the car up, go forward until I've got enough momentum where I can just plow through the snow and, just drive like a banshee almost. But if it gets to be deeper, you're like, okay, now I've got to find it. I have to shovel the car and get under the car and rock back and forth and stuff like that. Or, sometimes someone's just going to push it, like they'll stop the car. Those guys could have done that, and maybe they weren't familiar with being in the snow and being stuck. But to get out of the car with gasoline in it, you can leave it running to stay warm. You choose to walk out of the car and go into the heart of the Plymouth, which, if you look at the terrain, it's roughly, in spots 5,000 feet, or 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet. It's very mountainous. It's not like you're Thoreau walking in the wall, like we're going to walk into the woods,
And
something
not
like that.
exactly the best time for a nice little nature walk.
Yeah, mid-February, freezing temperatures, lots of snow. And we were talking about this at lunch because if you get into the snow and you start walking, your pants are going to get wet, your shoes are going to get wet. We talked about being cold wet. Like my kids, we would go outside and play, or sledding, or having a snowball fight. And I noticed they had like wool gloves on, and they had a certain type of hat. Cold. I'm like, yeah, I told you to put on the insulated stuff. And if you get cold wet, and even I went sledding with my kids, like snow gets down your back, it's just like, okay, that's not fun. But to walk in that and to be in that for hours, that's very dangerous because you're just ramping up the hypothermia machine to basically say, okay, the time we have for survival is reducing into critical minutes. And for those men, because where we see the car abandoned and where the remains will be found, that's a 12-mile walk through the mountains. And you're wearing...
In the dark.
In the dark, you have tennis shoes on, you have jeans on, and you're going to be cold and wet. Depending on
Not
what
likely that was voluntary.
No, not at all. Something, and we were doing that at lunch today. We're talking about the theories that we have, like what happened at night, some of the strange encounters that they have as soon as they abandon the car, like someone else is up there in the middle of nowhere. Lots of stories that go around town about someone's involvement. It's like, wow, this stuff just doesn't go away. And there's something more to this case.
So in the days immediately following the disappearances of these 5 gentlemen, the families are extremely worried. The press is covering it, And it appears, at least in those early stages, that the police department is searching. They're helping with, circulating flyers. They understand that there's urgency here. And then a ranger discovers the beloved car, but without its occupants. And you introduce us to an eyewitness named Joseph, who steps forward and says he saw the men that night.
Yes.
Super helpful, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about this witness?
We were talking about it on lunch. His name's Joe Shones. He lives in the Plymouth National Forest. Joe is the town drunk and is the last person to see these men alive. The problem with Joe is he lives like here in what's called Berry Creek. Let's say the car is up here about 15, 20 miles near a place called Merrimack, not the Davis, or the Rogers Cow Camp, up this way. He decides to stop by a bar, drink, stop by another bar, drink, and then drive north. People who live up that way say, why are you going that way in a Volkswagen Beetle? Because you're going up into the snow and onto roads that aren't paved. And if you get stuck, you're up there by yourself because really it's no man's land by a certain point. Joe goes up that way, gets stuck in the snow, decides to push his Beetle out on his own, claims he suffers a heart attack. This happens at 6 p.m. on the 24th, gets back in his car, turns on his Volkswagen, leaves it running, and at midnight he says the car with the 5 men pulls up at a distance of maybe like a city block or a few city blocks, and they may have a car behind them. They pull up, and depending on the guy's story, a man and a woman with a baby walk out of the car behind Jack Rodriguez Montego, and they all get in the truck and vanish, or the car pulls up, and maybe the truck pulls up, and all 5 men run into the woods.
Completely ignoring him in a medical crisis.
Right, he says like that. He screams out, help, I've had a heart attack. He'll say that he screams for help, but he'll also say that they walked up to his car with flashlights, and he would like, the window was cracked, he was like, help, I'm dying, and they walk away. And so, this is the last guy who sees him. And when the press gets wind of Joe Shones, they all start talking to him. So, the Sacramento Bee, the LA Times, the newspaper in Chico, I think, and a few others reach out to him. So he does all these interviews, but when the interviews come back, he's contradicting himself. And he's interviewed twice by law enforcement. His story's changed. So this guy who sees him is not a reliable witness. And what did he really see, we'll never know. He has passed away, and it's been the most frustrating part of this investigation because the last person to see them alive is the quote-unquote unreliable narrator. And so, at first when I heard about the story, I'm like, wow, this poor guy had a heart attack, and he's stuck on the same road, and then you go up that way, and you research the case, and you talk to more people, and they kind of play. Yeah, and Tom McGarry's neighbor, they're like, hey, think about it. What's that guy doing in the middle of nowhere at the same time these guys abandoned their car? Like, what are the odds?
McGarry had some strong opinions about Joe.
Yeah, Tom McGarry, he's
lots of opinions.
Yeah, he's a guy from New York who went out to California to sort of live off the grid, and he did so around 80, 81. But his neighbor was Joe Shones, and he said living next to Shones was an adventure. It's kind of the Wild West out in that way, but from what Tom has said to me as, his neighbor, and he's also talked to Drew Beeson, who's another researcher, that the stories line up, that Shones is not a reliable person, drinks a lot, gets his car stuck up there quite a bit, and is a super shady dude. And it's like, and Tom McGarry does say this in the book, the worst thing that could happen to those guys is running into Joe Shones, because his story makes no sense, it changes constantly, and to have that last witness be that type of person just puts the whole case in a state of like confusion, because I've talked about it with people before. Is Shones telling 5% of the truth or 95% of the truth? And, it's at 5% we're in trouble, but it's 95%. What's the other 5% we need to fix with the story to make this right? Because some people say, like, the guys could have driven up that way, stumbled across Shones, and they're like, what is this guy doing up here? And he comes running out of his car screaming, and they're like, oh no. And, he scares them away. But at the same time, the window rolled down partially.
Yes.
The keys are not in the car, but Jack Madruga would have kept his car with the window down and unlocked. And so that again puts it into the theme of things aren't right with this.
A lot of inconsistencies.
Yeah, it is. This is so weird because the more we talk about it, like we did at lunch, and we talked on the phone, and we, messaged each other for years. It's like there's all these scenarios we can, go down, like these paths, and then there's this other one we're like, oh, we gotta go down this path too, and then, oh, what about this? Or did you hear about that? And I call it a journey into madness because it is that. You just think it's a simple case, but it's the iceberg you don't expect. Because you can see the tip of the iceberg out of the water, but once you go under the water, it's like, oh man, this is a massive iceberg. And I know we're using a little social media terminology, but yeah, you discover these cases and it's more than you ever imagined.
So moving along our timeline, we know that after months of just no answers at all, families anxiously waiting to hear, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst, and then Ted is discovered.
Right.
So I'd like for you to tell us a little bit more about that, but I'm going to roll this into another question.
Sure.
We know that forensics in the 1970s are not optimal. So was there anything gleaned from the scene where Ted was found, or from where any of the other victims were found? Was there any preservation of the scenes of these deaths or the bodies themselves of the victims? Was there anything preserved that perhaps today's technology could review and provide answers for?
Okay. I'll set it up so that if the car is here, if you go up about 12 miles through winding roads that are cut through the mountains for logging, that's where they find a trailer, where they find Ted's remains. If you're to walk across the land, it's a little over 5 miles. But walking across the land is extremely difficult. Because like I said, it's the foothills and mountains.
In the snow.
In the snow, you've got to be experienced. And you've got to be the true outdoors person to survive that. So Ted is found in a trailer. He's wrapped up in blankets. It's trailers used by, like people working fires or logging. It's sort of temporary housing. They're new trailers at the time. And when he's found, some guys are like on a motorcycle weekend. They stumble across the area, discover Ted's remains, call the sheriff's department. They come up. The law enforcement that's doing all the research and investigating, they come up, they find Ted. So he's found in this trailer, and they're like, okay, the car's here, but it's northeast 12 miles. How'd that happen? And then if you go probably 3-5 miles, sort of like southwest, they find Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling had passed away near a road that was leading up there about a mile southeast. They find Jackie Hewitt's remains. So
Found by his father.
Found by his father, because once they said Ted's been found, everybody goes up to the trailer. According to one of the family members, they said once the trailer was discovered, everybody went to the trailer. People were walking, it's what we call a crime scene. So people were walking through a crime scene, and basically it's not, according to some people, it wasn't cordoned off. They didn't secure the area, they just kind of let, everyone kind of walk.
It's been contaminated.
It's been contaminated, and then what's taken from the trailer that Ted was in, and I'll explain this more. There was a propane hookup that could keep the trailer. But it's believed when the men showed up to the trailer, that was covered with snow. And if that's covered with snow, you're not going to see it. Inside the trailer, someone had lit a candle. That's not going to keep you warm. But they had somehow survived inside of the trailer without heat. There were sea ration cans, because that's what they stocked for food. They had dried food in there as well that was never touched. But the sea ration cans had been open. Someone had been eating the food. they find Gary Mathias' shoes in there. So they're already pointing out, okay, we've got Gary and we've got Ted in the trailer. Did Bill, Jack, and Jackie make it in? Some people say all of them made it in. Some people believe that maybe just 2 of them, or 3 of them. And from what we have of the remains that were found in the others, unfortunately, there's no easy way to say this, but animals had scattered a lot of remains, and it's a huge area that you would have to cordon off and just go through a meticulous search for remains. There were like the cans, some cardboard, and some other items. They tried to get fingerprints. Ted had really bad frostbite, and he had suffered through the elements, and it was hard to they just couldn't get any DNA. They didn't test for fingerprints. They were letting people go through the trailer. Where the others were found, it's in an open area, and I don't know how much they were looking for clues or anything like that. They can't find Gary's remains. So
additionally, they're not even sure at what time each of them died, because when they found Ted, they noted that he lost a massive amount of weight, as well as he had a full-grown beard, whereas the night that they left, he was clean shaven.
Right, and
So a significant amount of time passed.
they're thinking 4 to 8 weeks, maybe a little bit longer for Ted. The others they couldn't figure out because they were the coroner's office was kind of frustrated with the lack of remains, that the only thing they could say is their cause of death was exposure. And for Ted, it was pulmonary edema, fluid buildup, and of course the exposure to his frostbite. And the coroner's office said, I only have so much to work on. This is what I'm going to say happened. But with Jack Madruga, they did find a broken rib that happened before his death. And they don't know what happened. Did he get injured playing basketball? Did he have a fall in the Plymouth? Did they get in a fight somewhere? Is this what caused, going from point A to point B? So it's hard to tell. Like, if we have today's technology back then, would it be better? Yeah, it would definitely be better. Would we still know? I would hope we would know more.
So there were some of the family members of the victims pointed this out too, but why would authorities not search that area fairly quickly after the disappearances were reported? Because it seems kind of like a logical place to look, if not the very first, then at least before several months had passed. So the discoveries were made in June, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And the disappearance was in February. That's quite an amount of time.
Yeah.
And I know that Jackie's dad was quite frustrated and had some choice words for how the case was being handled.
Yes. Mr. Hewitt, Jackie's dad, had spent from, I think, the day they found the car until he found his son's remains. He was given paid time off from his work. They said, go find your son. And he was up there daily. And he was, he was an old timer, Hellraiser from Missouri, and that's the show me state. So I was definitely a true show me kind of guy. And he knew that to do the job right, you got to do it his way. Because he felt like there was there's 4 different groups of law enforcement, a lot of thinking around, and guys not taking it seriously. And even talking with Ted Weir's sister Dorothy and some other family members, they all say the same thing. Why didn't you check those cabins? If the Forestry Service tells you we have cabins here, here, and there, why didn't you check those cabins? And according to some of the family members, they were basically led to believe that law enforcement would not believe that those guys could walk 12 miles. And someone said they were just too stupid to go that way. They didn't think that way. Some of the other guys that were in part of law enforcement thought, we thought they walked south. But I talked to people who lived up that way, and they said, if you get out of a car in the Plymouth National Forest in the middle of the night, and I've been there with the lights off in the car when we filmed with Netflix, you get out of the car, you can't tell where you're going because it's pitch black. The stars are out, if you're lucky. Maybe the moon is bright enough, and you could probably, without any kind of compass, maybe try to find your way. But this is an incredibly, like, it's impressive and at night, but it's scary.
So there's no reasonable assumption of like what direction they would have headed from the car. The search really needed to go in all directions.
And we were talking about, I keep saying we were talking about this a bunch, but a snowcat, according to the Forestry Service, they took that up towards the cabins for the trailers where they found Ted because they were new. A lot of snow had fallen, and they felt like if the snow accumulates on the roof and the temperature drops, that melting snow can become ice. And if it rains and then it gets cold, it's going to just make this huge block of ice. It's going to be a nightmare. It's going to crack the roof. It's going to bring water. These are new trailers. So they said on February 23rd, the day before they vanished, let's send snowcats that way, clear off the roof, and just, get that done. But if the guys got out of the car and they saw that path, it could have been like, oh, well, that's our only way up there. Because the roads aren't paved, and to get up that way, you would need like a vehicle like a snowcat. There's no other way to get up there. And if the snowcat doesn't clearly plow like a snowplow, it's going to flatten it. Like if you've all watched The Shining, where Wendy has that, that's a snowcat. That's like something she could use to get away, and that'd be kind of vehicle to sort of clear the path. It's going to flatten the snow, and you're still going to be walking on it, but it's going to be more packed into the ground. Easier to manage. Because even some cities, in the US, like they get so much snow, they're just let the snow pack, it's going to be hard enough, you're going to have traction on it with your car. And that's the way we think the guys found the path. Because it's a 1 in a million shot to follow this winding little logging road through the mountains to get to this trailer. It's unbelievable that they were able to find it. And to get there, it just baffled so many people. But they kept pointing fingers saying, nobody told us about these trailers. And other people were saying, yeah, we specifically pointed these out on the map. Jackie Hewitt's dad said, there's trailers up there, are you checking them? So I've heard about them. And they checked other trailers because a guy with like a witching stick said that he could find bodies anywhere. They broke down the door of a cabin that he said had bodies in it, and they're like, there's nothing in the trailer. And he's like, oh, this must be an old, like, Native American burial ground or something. And the cops are like, come on, dude, seriously? And, like, psychics were coming out, and they were calling in psychics, and they were giving all this, like, information. There's all these sightings of the men. Wrong places, wrong times. It's like all of this bad information coming in, and then lackluster search efforts. It just add it all together. It's this like, really strange disappearance. It's not helping anything. It just makes everything more difficult. It's just really rough.
So before we turn it over to our guests for Q&A, I just really want to commend you for what I'm perceiving as a very humanizing approach to this story in what is often a very vicious and exploitative genre. And I understand from the foreword written by Shannon McGarvey that you also developed relationships with the families of the victims. Mm-hmm. So is there anything in particular that the families might like us as the readers to learn or to take away from this tragedy?
With the family, I know Dallas Weir's Ted's nephew is here. I've been talking to him for years, like Drew. We still talk. So there's no line of communication that's cut off. Like Dallas will call me, he's like, Mr. Tony Wright, how you doing? And we'll talk about how we're doing. Because when I when I started writing the book, I said, okay, there's got to be a chapter on all 5 guys. And when I talked to the families, Bill Sterling's family's been out in the spotlight since 78. That's fine. All the other families are like, okay, if you want to talk, let's talk. And when you talk to one family member, they're like, did you ever talk to so-and-so? Have you met so-and-so? It's like, what was the TV show, How I Met Your Mother? Like they always say, have you met Ted? It's like, have you met this person? Have you talked to him? And one interview leads to all these people. And, I still talk to them. Some people are easy to get through, like messaging or email. Other people, you kind of, specific times of the day, you have to call or out of the blue. And we're not always talking about the case. We'll talk about, how are things out in California? How are things here in Texas? some of them live in Oregon, like, how's the travel going? How are the kids? And they'll ask me the same thing. So, but true crime, I get really annoyed when I read. It's almost like reading the tabloids.
Yes.
My one grandpa would always get the Enquirer, the Star. He called it the scandal sheets. I'm like, Grandpa, why are you reading that? It's like a bunch of goofball stuff. And he's like, oh, this is the news. And so I would make sure, like, hey, listen, these are 5 people that managed, and everyone, you still say in the comment section, makes me mad. Like, there's all these like backhanded comments about what happened, and it's like, no, read this book.
There were people.
Yeah, these are people who died, and they're not just like footnotes in history, or like, oh, that's cool. Like, no, it's not. It's a story, and these are people, and their case was kind of bungled, and there's still misinformation about the case out there today, and there's a lot of bad feedback from people. But the nice thing is, we've met people from around the world. We were talking with Drew in Dallas, and I received emails from people like, a guy in Argentina named Eduardo, who's really into the case, and people in the UK, Anthony and Kenny, who are definitely into the case. A lady from Germany emailed me. She's a teacher who works with kids with special needs, and says, like, we need more of this. And I talked to a guy named Noel who lives in Spain, and he was really moved by the book, and he was meeting all these people. It's like, this is amazing, because you hear from them, and like, there's connection. And then talking around the U.S., like this year I went to like Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and met like special education teachers and people who work in the criminal justice system, and they'll tell you, like, this case doesn't make sense. And I talked to like 2 FBI agents that are retired in Atlanta, and they said, one of them has a child who's on the autism spectrum. They're like, okay, this isn't making any sense. So you meet all these people who care about the case and care about the people, and that's the way we should be writing true crime, not like, somebody died, cool. And like, we don't want to do it like that. Because there's people involved in the story, and you don't want to make them almost like, not important to the story, that you just want to focus on other things. It's so frustrating talking about true crime. I like true crime. It's like sports. You meet people who love sports, and they're passionate about it, or they're passionate about music or something, but you just get these idiots who just ruin it for everyone, and just like, oh, but yeah. I'm so glad to have met the families and met other people who do the research, and we hang out, still talk today, and we're always going to talk about the case. And 2028 will be the 50th anniversary of the case, and it would be nice by then to know more about what happened that night, because we talk about that from time to time. Like, 50 years is coming up. Where do we think we're going to be at the 50th anniversary? And I hope we're at a place where we've got some kind of answer, because if not, I think it's going to be a hard time for a while.
If not closure, then answers.
Yeah, something's got to come. Even finding the remains of Gary Matthias at this point,
Yes.
that's huge. Because I talked about the guy Anthony who lives in the UK. He put down his own money for a reward to help find Gary. His remains in the Lakes National Forest, and that was huge. I applaud all these people who are helping. So and that's what we need: more people who are here to help and give insight and support.
Thank you. It's time to turn it over to our audience now for questions.
Any questions, anyone? Okay. I'm gonna walk over.
I have a question about the,
Here we go.
you mentioned the case was bungled, and you mentioned that it was the Wild West up there.
Yeah.
What percent do you think this is sort of a mystery and it isn't solved? Because there was a little bit of, we don't want to solve this, we don't want to look at it. Maybe the police were paid off, maybe they were scared off. The coroner's report on all the remains was really pretty superficial. Like, the bones have been scattered, so we're just going to call it exposure. I mean, it seems like there was a lot of things pointing to, let's bury this, let's just let it go, let's just make it a mystery, and we don't know. And I forget the sheriff's name who said it's bizarre as hell.
Beecham.
That's not what he should say.
Yeah, yeah, and I had talked to Beecham, and I've talked to quite a few people out in up Northern California, and there's definitely an opinion of a lot of people that way that law enforcement's crooked, and the judicial system has a lot of guys who are just, taking bribes, and, one guy called the Yuba County Sheriff's Department at the time the Keystone Cops, and there's a lot of people out there, different backgrounds, different outlooks on life who all have the same opinion. Like, they bungled this case, and they felt like there's been a lot of corruption in law enforcement up there, and in the judicial system. There's all these cooks in the kitchen, doing the research, and nobody wants to talk to each other, but everybody wants to take, home the trophy, saying, like, we solved this case, we did it. And also, like Jackie Hewitt's dad believed that the searchers weren't working hard enough because they kind of wrote these guys off due to their disabilities and mental illness, saying
They have been told not to find it. You don't
Right.
go out there and find it. They just sit by the farm state war march and go look for something and told not to find it.
yeah, and we hear that all the time from a lot of the people, even talking with Dallas and his family and talking with Drew. A lot of the families feel like, man, like, what were you doing up there? Like, if you had, and the reports are not crystal clear, but if you had 100 to 200 volunteers in this area searching, what did you search? Where did you go? How much ground did you cover? If you had a helicopter, where did you go with the helicopter? Did you go up towards those cabins? Could you have seen those cabins?
When was it ever declared a crime scene at the cabin? These people walk through. Well, at first they thought this was a tragic error, this was a tragic mistake with these boys, and they wouldn't have cordoned it off.
So talking with Jack Beecham, who was the undersheriff of Yuba County, Avery Blankenship, who was with Yuba County, Ted Weir actually had relatives who were in law enforcement too. And talking with Gary Mathias' sister, who had been up there, she said, and they all kind of made it seem like once they found the remains, they declared it a crime scene. Started taking pictures, trying to figure out what happened. But when Gary Mathias' sister went up there, she said she got out of the car and saw people walking everywhere. And I think Jackie Hewitt's dad had shared that information because he passed down a lot of information before his death to his son and daughter-in-law, saying people are around that area and they're walking all through, and there are newspaper reporters up there, television reporters. They said it was like just a three-ring circus up there. And so it was very difficult for them to figure out, who's all been through the scene, who's contaminated, who's touched something, who's moved something, who's kind of gone through all this stuff. So, very frustrating.
And then one of the family members said that some of the negatives from the photos had just been left out on the table outside.
His name's Jerry Harrison. He was related to Ted. And he said that's how he knew it was Ted's remains that were found. He's like, I know him. And that is a relative of mine, Ted Weir. And he just said that the negatives were left out. We've encountered some of that careless stuff going on throughout the investigation, and it's frustrated so many people.
We have a few questions from the online audience.
All right. If they want to share their names, that'd be great too, because I might know some of those people.
Brian Huber, since publishing the book, has any new or additional information come to light about the five?
No. I know that when I talk to people, Drew, Dallas, we'll try to see if we can hear anything, and no new leads have come in, which was unfortunate because we felt like the show on Netflix had, pretty good showing, and there's been nothing new. Just more rumor stuff, and that's about it. Nothing solid.
Now, Tom Havel has two questions. The first one is, he says, could you ask how thorough did the police / agencies involved look into the preacher?
So, there is a suspect called the town bully, aka the preacher. This is a name that doesn't go away. I'm not going to say their name publicly. The only thing we have with this person is so many people name this person the main suspect. Did the police ever talk to them, or law enforcement ever talk to this person directly? I don't know, because that's never been reported. They've received like information, second party, third party about this person, and I don't think they followed up with it. First, thank you to Brian for that question, and thanks to Tom for this question, because I know both. And what was, did Tom have another part to the question?
Tom did have another question. He asked, he said, you mentioned talking to a retired FBI agent. Did the FBI ever get involved in the case?
No, and the FBI, when I talked to them, were surprised. And I talked to some of the family members, and they've been surprised that the FBI wasn't called in. It's missing persons in the national park. Could that be something that's right up, right up their alley? And retired FBI agents said, yeah, we've been called in for missing persons cases before, and it seems like it makes a lot of sense. And in California at the time, you had 4 jurisdictions of law enforcement, but the highest they went was with the state of California. So with like their State Bureau of Investigation, they brought a guy in, and that's something that we never understood, why there was a reluctance to call in the FBI. And it was one of those, we're going to do it ourselves kind of attitudes, there's no need to come in. It's hard to tell why that never happened.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, so you may address this in the book.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to doing that.
Okay.
You said that there is a sense that people are not sharing information any longer because different factions want to be the ones that eventually solve it.
Mhm.
But is this a closed case? Is there any open? Is there an active search for the one missing man? Or is there any law enforcement group that has this on their radar as something that should be looked at, even as a cold case?
It's still a cold case listed by Yuba County because Gary Mathias is still missing. Are they still working on it? They have someone assigned to the case. How much do they get as far as calls or information? I don't know. I know they've received some calls over the years. Is anyone else going to pick up this case? I doubt it. Is it a closed case? No, because Gary hasn't been found. And the other families have said that they feel like the investigation ended too quickly, and there was never any answers to say, this is definitively what we think what happened. It was almost like, we found 4 of the bodies, Gary's missing, let's wrap it up. And what happens is sometimes with law enforcement, especially in the sheriff's department's elected positions, so when someone gets elected out of the position and someone new comes in, it's almost like, okay, I've got a new focus, and we want to do this, this, and that. And even the Yuba County Sheriff's Department didn't want anyone looking at the files until the new sheriff came in and said, you know what, this case is 40 years old, take a look. And that's what they told me. They're like, if you're going to fly out to California, come out and look at the case. But it's still open, it's not solved. And you can talk to the family members, they will tell you it's not solved. Gary's not found, and no one has given them the right, proper answer on this case.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I hope you enjoyed the book too.
I actually was not too late. Couple of things.
Yeah.
Were the car keys ever found?
They were on Jack Madruga when they found his remains.
Okay.
So they knew that he took the keys from the
So
car.
he was right.
Yeah, he was around. So they were able to hotwire the car as soon as they found it and said, okay, there's a quarter of a tank of gas. The undercarriage is in pristine condition. Looks like someone's been spinning the tires because of the mud flaps kind of showed like someone had been spinning the tires in the snow. And they were just kind of puzzled, like, okay, why would you leave the car? You could just leave it running intermittently, to keep warm a little bit, turn it off, turn it back on when things get cold.
And you wouldn't have left the door or the window open because it was so cold.
Yeah, and when we talk about this all the time, like, why do you crack down a window? Like, is someone standing right there? Yeah, exactly. Like, is someone like coming down to you Maybe they have a gun, or maybe they have a way of saying, you're gonna get out of the car, and we're gonna do this.
Well, did anyone benefit from any of these people, their demise? I mean, maybe three of them were just collateral and one person had an insurance policy. I mean, it's something, I'm trying to think of, is it the Bermuda Triangle situation where you just got turned around and were convinced you were going the right way and kept going the wrong way until they were stuck, or were they led or forced to go there?
We believe that something led them that way. So Jack Madruga, the driver, grew up in the area. He would have known, getting into the Plumas, like, no, we're not going the right way. Because to get up into the Plumas, if you ever go this way, you cross a big bridge over a reservoir called the Bidwell Bar Bridge. It's like a C-shaped bridge. And once you get on it, you're like, no, this isn't the right way.
So this crime almost had to start in the parking lot of the basketball game.
Oh,
or at the snack store.
They're at the convenience store, but to get where they were, they'd have to go through a town called Warrenville. It's a small town. It's kind of a rough and tumble kind of area. And if they went that way, maybe someone said, hey, can I use the restroom, or use the payphone, or get cigarettes? And, part of me thinks once they exited into Warrenville, something happened there in that town. They either saw someone, ran into a bunch of drunk idiots, or something happened where it started this chain reaction that ends up in the Plumas. We don't believe they got lost, that you got turned around, because you have to exit the highway. You have to take this road called the Quincy, like the Dam Road, it's the DAM Road, not the DAMN Road. You have to take the road to the dam by the reservoir to get on the Bidwell Bar Bridge, and then you go up the Quincy Highway. But the Quincy Highway in the winter is shut off in spots because they get too much snow and it's impassable. And where they abandoned the car, the road had been chained off, and they said, we're not going to let cars through here in the winter. But when you see the way the roads are, they're winding, and there's pine trees, there's snow, there's freezing temperatures, Jack Madruga, the driver, would have been like, yeah, this isn't Marysville. Because they'd gone to Chico before.
Right.
They've been to Sacramento. And this is a big thing that Drew told me, there's no history of these guys ever getting lost.
Well,
They could drive to Sacramento to a gymnasium they've never been to before for basketball practice and come home, or go out roller skating, or go to Chico other times to see basketball, or Sacramento for games, and come back, no problem. They know what they're doing, but the problem is we don't know what got them diverted this way.
Well, we also know that there was violence against the Gateway Project. There were a string of arsons and an unsolved murder.
Right, another thing we were talking about before getting here. So they were part of this adult program called Gateway Projects, where they would train people with mental illness and disabilities. Here's some job skills, you can become self-sufficient. There's a lot of life coaching. The basketball team was through this. But around 75, someone set fire to their main facility, started throwing Molotov cocktails at other buildings. Other members who worked there had their cars set on fire, and then someone murdered the director of the place. They set the person on fire. Who's doing this? Why are they doing this? And early on in the case, people were asking, like, okay, you had this murder, you had all these unsolved arson attacks and threats against people working at Gateway with these guys. Could someone have, the person behind this may have tried to put two and two together, like, hey, do these guys know something about me being that person and I'm gonna come after them? I mean, again, it's just part of the whole list of what ifs with this case, like, the town holy preacher has something to do with it. Was it deranged fans? Was it the arsonist? It's like, we gotta figure this out.
So we're out of time.
Okay.
We're over our time, but thank you for the great discussion. I want to thank both of you, Tony Wright. I want to thank you for sharing your story with us here at HPL, Houston Public Library. I want to thank our moderator, Dr. April Paluca. for the discussion as well. Thank you to everyone here for attending. Thank you for everyone online. After this, if you'd like, we're going to be signing. If you have a book and you want it signed, he'll be happy to sign the book for you. Feel free after this event to get a library card at the customer service desk or go online to our website for more information on additional author visits and programs. Thank you for joining us.